Okay, let's unpack this. Imagine an advanced AI, large language model,
Mm-hmm.
trained on just tons of human writing.
Mm-hmm.
What if it wrote a guide on how to write fiction?
Yeah, what would it actually prioritize? What does it think makes a story, great?
It's a pretty wild thought experiment, isn't
It
it?
really is. I mean, these models, they analyze patterns across millions and millions of books, stories.
Things we could never process ourselves.
Exactly, at a scale no human can.
Yeah.
So tapping into that viewpoint on creativity, it's just fascinating.
Totally. And that's exactly what we're going to dive into today.
Right.
We have this really detailed how-to guide generated by ChatGPT.
Okay.
And our mission here is to really go through it, pull out the key insights, the surprises, maybe even where this AI view differs from, standard writing advice.
And like looking at the AI's blueprint for storytelling, right?
Yeah.
Going beyond the usual craft tips to see how the LLM organizes it all.
Yeah, and especially when we get to the part about using AI itself. That's going to be interesting.
Oh, definitely.
So whether you're deep in writing your own story, or maybe you're just curious about how these AI models see fiction.
Or understand it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
This deep dive should be right up your alley. Let's get into the AI's perspective on the craft.
Let's do it. Where does it start?
Okay, so the guide kicks off right at the beginning. The absolute bedrock. What does this AI say are the fundamental building blocks, before you even type chapter 1?
Right. It puts a lot of weight, apparently, on defining the core idea first.
The core idea.
Yeah, it frames it as answering the what if question. What's the central hook?
Okay.
What's the main conflict? And crucially, what are the stakes involved?
So less about a cool character initially and more about the story's engine.
Precisely. It's about finding that narrative spark and making it super clear from the get-go.
Okay, makes sense. What's next after the spark?
From there, it moves into understanding genre conventions and reader expectations.
The usual suspect.
Kinda, but here's the interesting bit. It doesn't just say know the rules. It specifically mentions surveying common tropes and thinking about how to subvert them.
Oh, wow. So right away, it's talking about playing with expectations.
Yeah, it's highlighting that balance between giving readers something familiar, but also something fresh. Originality versus those familiar beats.
That feels pretty sophisticated, doesn't it? The AI gets that readers enjoy twists on formulas.
I think that comes from processing so much data. It sees the patterns people expect, and it sees the variations that really grab attention.
Okay, so core idea, genre awareness. What's the third foundation?
The classic, show, don't tell.
Of course.
Yeah, the guide really emphasizes immersive description, but it also says, know when a quick summary, the telling part is actually more effective, using it judiciously.
Right. Sometimes you just need to get the information across quickly. The source material had those great examples, didn't it?
Yeah.
She was angry versus describing her tight grip and flushed face.
Exactly. Really concrete illustrations.
So why does the AI, I think getting these three things, core idea, genre, show versus tell, why are they so essential right at the start?
Well, the guide basically treats them as non-negotiable, like the roots of the whole story.
Okay.
If the core idea isn't clear, the reader's lost. If you're telling all the time, they're not in the story, they're just being lectured.
Right. Disconnected.
And understanding genre sets up that unspoken agreement with the reader. Even if you plan to break that agreement later, you need to know what it is first. These are the structural pillars.
Got it. Foundational integrity. Right. So with those pillars in place, where does the AI guide point us next? It seems like it moves outward into the story's environment.
That's right. It spends a lot of digital ink on world building and setting.
Okay.
And the AI's approach here is very systematic, almost analytical.
How so?
It breaks setting down into these distinct layers. There's macro, the whole world's climate, geography.
Big picture stuff.
Yeah. Then meso, the town or neighborhood level.
Right.
Think, bustling market stalls, the look of the streets.
Okay. Zooming in.
And finally, micro. The details inside a room, the feel of a velvet curtain, the sound of a creaky floorboard. It even suggests using precise terms, like Gothic buttresses.
Wow, that level of categorization feels like something an AI processing huge amounts of text might naturally come up with. Is the takeaway for writers just to be that rigorous?
I think partly, yeah. It's giving you a framework so you don't just vaguely think the setting. It pushes you to consider how environment works at every scale.
Right.
And it really doubles down on this with environmental sensory detail. It literally goes through all 5 senses.
A checklist for immersion.
Pretty much. Sight, color palettes, light and shadow, sound, ambient noise, specific character sounds like clicking heels, smell and taste, how they trigger memory, and touch, textures, temperature, humidity, all with examples.
That's incredibly thorough. It's not just saying describe things, it's giving you the toolkit.
Exactly. And it wraps this section up by talking about weather, atmosphere, and mood.
Using the environment emotionally.
Yes, like using a storm to mirror a character's turmoil, or how different kinds of light dawn versus twilight create different feelings. The guide makes it clear these details aren't just decoration.
They're functional.
They're functional tools to make the world feel solid, real, immersive, and to even underscore the story's themes or a character's internal state. It's about making the reader inhabit the world.
Okay, a rich sensory world is great, but it needs people or, creatures, whatever the story involves. How does the guide tackle characters?
Right. The next big chunk is character development and voice. And it hits hard on creating multidimensional characters.
It goes beyond just listing traits, I assume.
Oh, yeah. It suggests weaving physical description into action. The example was like a character brushing ash off their shoulders tells you something about where they've been or what happened, right?
Right. It's active showing, not static description.
Exactly. And it pushes for exploring psychological depth. Show their internal thoughts, their conflicting desires, their vulnerabilities. Don't just state them. It even mentions using character bios, but more as like initial scaffolding to build upon, not the finished character.
That idea of weaving description into action is such a great practical tip from the source. What about backstory? That can be tricky.
Definitely. The guy offers strategies for revealing backstory gradually.
Okay, avoiding the dreaded info dump.
Totally. It talks about using memory triggers, maybe a specific object like a cracked mirror, or hearing a fragment of an old lullaby, things that spark a memory naturally within the current scene.
Nice. Subtle.
And weaving those formative past events into the present without stopping the story cold. The example of a scarred forearm hinting at a tough past. It's classic technique, and the AI flags it as effective.
Using dialogue and subtext, too, I imagine.
Absolutely. Hinting at things through what characters say, or more importantly, what they don't say.
It feels like the AI is really systematizing these techniques for revealing background info. Not just don't info dump, but here are specific ways to avoid it.
It does feel very structured, and central to all this character work is voice.
Crucial.
The guide covers crafting distinctive voices. It looks at things like dialogue rhythms. Is the character's speech short and clipped, or long and rambling?
And the sound.
Yeah, and the consistency, or maybe the inconsistency, between their internal voice, what they think, and their spoken voice, what they actually say.
Ooh, that gap can reveal a lot about a character.
Huge amounts. And of course, shaping the narrative point of view, whether it's first person or close third, to really reflect that specific character's way of seeing the world.
So what's the key takeaway from the guide on getting voice right? Why is it so critical?
The guy basically says voice is what makes a character feel unique and authentic.
Their fingerprint.
Exactly. Their speech patterns, their perspective, how they process things internally versus externally, that's what builds a real connection with the reader. A strong, consistent, distinctive voice pulls you deep into that character's experience.
Okay, so we've got the world, we've got these multidimensional characters with distinct voices. How does the story actually, move? What about the plot, the structure, the pacing? The engineering of it all.
Right. The next big section is all about narrative structure and pacing. The skeleton of the story.
Okay.
It covers the overall story arc, discusses the classic structures, 3-act, 5-act, 7-point plots.
The familiar maps.
Yeah, and identifying those key turning points and act breaks. It also mentions non-linear approaches, but stresses you need a clear reason for jumping around in time. Don't just do it randomly.
So understand the rules before you break them. Seems like a theme.
Definitely. Structure gives you the framework. Then it addresses interweaving multiple storylines.
Complex plots.
Right. How to balance those parallel plots, figure out where they should intersect, and using clear signals like chapter headings or location changes to shift between threads without confusing the reader.
That seems important for modern stories, which often juggle multiple POVs.
Very much so. And then it gets into temporal play. Flashbacks, memories, messing with time.
How does it handle those?
It asks the key questions. When and how do you insert a flashback? What's its purpose? Is it revealing motive? Raising stakes? building empathy.
So flashbacks need a job to do.
Exactly. And it talks about signaling those time shifts clearly, using formatting or maybe tense changes. And crucially, it mentions the challenge of maintaining tension during non-chronological jumps.
Oh, yeah, that's tricky. How do you jump back in time without killing the forward momentum?
Right. It's not just about showing the past. The guide implies you should use the past reveal to actually heighten the suspense or emotional stakes in the present moment of the story.
That's a sophisticated point. Using backstory actively, not passively.
Yeah, it's advanced structural thinking. And finally, in this section, it looks at scene breaks.
Just the white space between scenes?
Well, how you use that white space. Seeing scene breaks as pacing tools, you can break at a cliffhanger to make the reader rush forward.
Create urgency.
Or use white space to give the reader and the character a moment to breathe, to reflect. Or maybe insert short little interludes for introspection between big action scenes.
So even the gaps matter for controlling the rhythm.
The AI sees these microstructural choices as really vital for managing the reader's experience and the overall pace.
So why does the guide put so much emphasis on all these structural elements, arcs, multiple plots, time jumps, scene breaks?
I think the guide suggests that modern readers often expect a certain level of narrative complexity.
We're used to layered storytelling.
Exactly. And these techniques, handling multiple plots, playing with time, they're the tools you need to build that complexity effectively without completely losing or disorienting your audience. And good pacing, guided by structure, is what keeps them hooked.
Okay, that makes sense. It's the architecture, holding everything up and guiding the reader through. So we've covered the big building blocks.
Mm-hmm.
The guide then seems to shift into, refining the craft, adding polish and depth.
Yeah, exactly. It pulls together several elements that really enhance the reader's experience and the story's impact.
What does it cover here?
Well, it revisits sensory writing and atmosphere, but maybe with more nuance.
Building on the earlier stuff.
Right. Reinforcing, engaging all five senses, but also talking about balancing them. The example was maybe you tasted smoke before seeing flames, using senses sequentially for effect.
Ah, neat.
It also gets into color, texture, and spatial relationships. Using color symbolically, creating textural contrasts, describing how characters actually move through a described space, sidestep to tapestry, that sort of thing.
Making the sensory details more active and meaningful.
Precisely. Then it dives into metaphor, simile, and symbolism.
Figurative language.
Yes, but it talks about layering metaphors so they evolve, selecting symbols that really resonate with the story's core themes. And this is great coming from an AI avoiding cliches.
Huh. Did it analyze all the bad ones?
It feels like it. It suggests actively seeking unexpected comparisons. The example given was comparing eyes to an algae pond gaze instead of just, emerald eyes.
Okay. Algae pond gaze is certainly memorable. That's fantastic advice from an AI, though avoid the overused patterns.
It really is. It's like the ultimate pattern matcher is telling you, hey, this pattern, too common, try something else.
What else is in this refinement section?
It revisits dialogue and interpersonal dynamics, focuses on making dialogue sound natural. By avoiding obvious exposition dumps, balancing tags, he said, with action beats or descriptions, and using realistic interruptions, hesitations, overlaps.
The stuff real conversations have.
Exactly. And it stresses showing conflict and power plays within conversations. Verbal sparring, sure, but also nonverbal cues, like a clenched jaw or a deliberate pause. Using silence as emphasis.
The power of the unsaid. Very cool.
And it touches on dialect, diction, and regionalisms, how to signal a character's background through their word choices accurately, but without using distracting phonetic spellings that pull the reader out.
That's a fine line to walk. So sensory details, figurative language, dialogue. What about the bigger picture? The meaning?
That gets its own focus, thematic depth and symbolic resonance.
Okay.
This involves identifying and weaving in your core themes, sometimes explicitly, sometimes implicitly, using recurring symbolic motifs like a wilting rose appearing at key moments.
Set things up.
Yeah, foreshadowing and payoff, planting subtle hints early on, like that example of a character repeatedly glancing at a locked door that pay off later, using dualities and contrasts like mirror image characters or settings to highlight themes.
And anything else on theme?
Yes, and this is interesting, embracing ambiguity.
Really? The AI recommends ambiguity.
Apparently so. Leaving some room for reader interpretation rather than needing to explain everything or tie up every single thread neatly.
That feels surprisingly human. Like it learned from complex literature that neat answers aren't always the most powerful.
It suggests the AI has analyzed not just structure, but the impact of certain narrative choices. The final piece in this refining section is maintaining coherence and continuity.
Making sure it all hangs together.
Exactly. Rigorous consistency checks, tracking your timeline, character details, invented terminology, like keeping a story Bible, and respecting the internal logic of the world you've created. Cause and effect need to work, even if it's a magic system. The rules you set have to be followed.
Avoid contradictions and plot holes.
Yes, using self-editing strategies like reading backward or getting beta readers specifically to hunt for those inconsistencies.
Why is that internal logic so crucial even in, say, a fantasy story? Seems counterintuitive.
The guide really emphasizes that continuity builds reader trust. If your own rules keep changing or facts contradict each other,
It breaks the spell.
completely, it pulls the reader right out. The guide argues that even the most fantastical world needs its own kind of physics to feel believable and immersive. Consistency is key.
Okay, that's a remarkably thorough breakdown of, mostly traditional writing craft. But the next section, this is where it gets really unique, right? What can a writer learn specifically from using an LLM? Like the one that actually generated this guide.
Yeah, this part is fascinating because it's the AI sort of reflecting on its own potential uses. Totally. It suggests using an LLM for brainstorming and prompts.
Oh.
It talks about generating, quote, plot salad ideas, just throwing stuff out there, or using it like an interview partner, asking it questions to expand a character's backstory, exploring what-if scenarios to maybe break out of your usual patterns or avoid cliches.
Plot salad. I love that term. From the source, it captures that messy, generative phase perfectly.
It really does. It also suggests using it for language enhancement and as a kind of super thesaurus.
Finding better words.
Yeah, finding fresher verbs, different nouns. The example was like maybe finding sputtered for sconces instead of just flickered, or testing out clusters of metaphors to see how they feel.
Okay, that could be useful.
But, and this is really important, it includes a strong caution. Avoid over-polishing.
What does that mean?
It warns against letting the AI smooth everything out so much that it strips away your authentic authorial voice, making the writing sound, well, generic or robotic.
Wow, that's incredibly self-aware, isn't it?
Seems
AI warning you not to sound too much like an AI.
It's almost uncanny. It seems to understand its own potential downside for a human writer, which leads to the next point, maintaining creative ownership.
Right. Who's really writing the story?
The guide stresses recognizing where the AI's suggestion is just a suggestion and where your own idea, your own twist takes over. It's about partnership, not replacement. It even mentions strategies to avoid plot algorithm fatigue.
Plot algorithm fatigue, another great term. What's that?
That feeling of getting stuck in the kind of patterns the AI tends to generate. The guide suggests consciously mixing AI ideas with your own work, your own research, to keep things fresh and personal.
So using it as a springboard, not a crutch. What else does the AI mention about using AI?
It brings up ethical considerations and attribution.
Important stuff.
Yeah. When and how should you credit AI help, especially if you're collaborating? And a really crucial warning, making sure any sensitive cultural or historical details are properly researched by you, the human.
Because the AI might get it wrong.
Exactly. The guide explicitly states that AI can hallucinate, generate inaccuracies, or perpetuate biases found in its training data. You can't blindly trust it for that kind of research.
That's a vital disclaimer. So this whole section is really the core of the AI's unique perspective, not just craft, but how it can play a role in the craft.
Yeah.
What's the main message here for writers?
I think the guide positions AI firmly as a tool, a potentially powerful one for ideation, for language exploration, maybe even for spotting patterns.
It's just a tool.
Just a tool. The author's unique voice, their critical judgment, their deep research, their creative vision, the guide presents those as absolutely essential and irreplaceable. It's about AI augmenting your process, not taking it over, and doing so responsibly.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So we've gone from the initial spark through building the world, characters, plot, refining everything, and even considering AI's role. The draft is theoretically done. What about the final stages? Getting it polished, getting it out there.
Right. The guide covers the later stages too.
Yeah.
Revision, feedback, and polishing.
The editing process.
Exactly. It breaks down self-editing into different passes, which is helpful. Macro level, looking at the big picture, the overall structure.
Does the story work?
Yeah. Then meso level, going scene by scene, checking flow, character consistency within scenes, and finally, micro level, the line-by-line polish. Syntax, rhythm, word choice, grammar, proofreading.
Breaking it down like that makes the huge task of revision feel less daunting.
It really does. It also talks about incorporating beta reader and critique feedback.
How to handle criticism.
Well, it offers advice on distinguishing objective issues, like, hey, this timeline doesn't make sense from subjective taste. I just didn't like this character.
That's a crucial distinction.
Hugely important. And it emphasizes asking targeted questions to your beta readers, not just did you like it, but things like which scene felt the most vivid, or where did you feel confused or pulled out of the story?
Smart. Getting actionable feedback, not just opinions. What are the very last steps in polishing?
Fine-tuning voice and tone one last time, making sure it's consistent, and then the final proofreading and checks. It mentions looking for common pitfalls, like maybe overused adverbs or too much passive voice.
The final sweep.
Yeah, and using checklists to make sure names, dates, invented terms, all that stuff is consistent right through to the end.
It seems incredibly comprehensive.
Yeah.
But it also included sections on the writer's mindset and even publication, didn't it? It covers a whole journey.
It's surprisingly holistic, yeah. It actually addresses building a writer's mindset and routine.
Oh, interesting. What does it say about that?
It offers techniques for overcoming writer's block, things like free writing, doing sensory sketching exercises, using constraints to spark ideas.
Practical tips.
Yeah. Maintaining creativity when you're under deadlines, balancing research time with actual writing time, avoiding those research rabbit holes we all fall into.
Guilty.
Aren't we all? And, really importantly, cultivating resilience and perspective.
How so?
Learning how to handle critique without letting it crush your self-worth. Separating feedback on the work from feedback on you, and remembering to celebrate the small wins along the way.
That focus on the mental game of writing feels really necessary. The AI guide gets it that it's not just about craft, it's an emotional and psychological marathon too.
Absolutely. It acknowledges the whole process. And then finally, it does touch upon preparing for publication.
Wow.
Covers both traditional routes and independent or self-publishing. Things like manuscript formatting standards, what agents and editors look for.
The business side.
Yeah, the essentials of self-publishing, like cover design, interior layout, basic marketing ideas, and even building a long-term author brand, being consistent, maybe using tools like AI for some promotional tasks, networking.
It really does take you from the absolute beginning, that tiny what if,
Yeah.
all the way through to potentially holding the published book and thinking about your career. That's quite a map.
It is an incredibly comprehensive roadmap of the entire writing landscape as seen through the lens of this AI.
So, reflecting on this whole deep dive, what does the AI's perspective on writing fiction ultimately tell us? Based on this guide it generated, it's clear the AI can synthesize a massive amount of traditional craft wisdom.
Yeah, and organize it into this highly systematic, incredibly detailed framework.
Right.
And the guide itself, in its summary section, kind of reinforces the big takeaways we've been touching on.
Or does it highlight?
It emphasizes the need for a holistic approach, juggling all these different elements simultaneously. The power of sensory immersion for pulling readers in, the value of understanding narrative complexity for, modern audiences, how AI can be used for AI-augmented creativity, but with those really important caveats about ownership and ethics.
With the tool aspect.
And finally, the importance of professional preparedness, understanding the editing, publishing, and mindset parts, too. It's a fascinating blend of established writing knowledge viewed through this new computational lens.
It definitely gives you a lot to chew on, doesn't it? Whether you're writing your first story or you're a seasoned pro.
For sure. This deep dive really shows how an AI, trained on just countless human stories, can almost reverse engineer the art form into these detailed, logical components.
Which leads to a pretty provocative thought for you listening. If an AI can analyze our fiction and break down the craft into such a comprehensive, structured guide, identifying all these key patterns and techniques, what did that tell us about the underlying structures of human narrative itself? Are there universal patterns it's uncovering? And how might understanding those patterns, whether you use AI to help see them or not, how might that fundamentally change the way you create stories, or maybe even just the way you experience the stories all around you?
Something to definitely think about. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the art and the AI of writing fiction.